Some people say money changes everything, but in my experience, it just reveals what was always there. I'm Grace Mitchell, and until 6 months ago, I was the family disappointment, the middle child who chose to become a small-town librarian instead of joining the family real estate empire. My grandfather, Theodore Ted Mitchell, built Mitchell Properties from nothing, turning a single lakefront cabin into a multi-million-dollar development company. My older brother James and younger sister Catherine followed in his footsteps, becoming successful real estate developers themselves. Meanwhile, I spent my days organizing books and running children's reading programs at the local library. Such a waste of potential, Mom would sigh at family gatherings. You could be making 6 figures if you just joined the family business. But Grandpa Ted never seemed disappointed in my choices. He'd visit me at the library sometimes, sitting in on story time, his weathered face crinkling with joy as I brought tales to life for wide-eyed children. Money isn't everything, Gracie, he'd tell me afterward. Some riches can't be counted. We had a special connection, Grandpa and I. While James and Catherine talked property values and investment strategies with him, I'd ask about the old days, about how he'd started the business, about the little lake house where it all began. He'd get this faraway look in his eyes, telling stories about fishing at dawn, about the mysterious lights he sometimes saw across the lake at night, about the secrets hidden in the depths of those dark waters. The lake house itself had become something of a family legend. Grandpa kept it exactly as it had been in the early days, refusing all offers to modernize or develop the property. It sat alone on its stretch of shoreline, a humble wooden cabin among the luxury homes that now dotted the lakefront. That property could be worth millions if developed properly. James would argue at family dinners. The location alone. But Grandpa would just shake his head. Some things are worth more than money, he'd say, and that would be the end of the discussion. I understood his attachment to the place. I'd spent countless summer afternoons there as a child, sitting on the old dock with Grandpa, fishing pole in hand, listening to his stories. The tackle box beside us was as much a part of those memories as anything. A battered green metal box that had been old even then. When Grandpa passed away last month, none of us were really surprised that James was named executor of the estate. He was the eldest, the most successful, the one who followed most closely in Grandpa's business footsteps. What did surprise us was the request for the whole family to gather at the lake house for the reading of the will. Probably wants us to finally see the development potential, James said confidently as we pulled up to the cabin. No better place to announce the property's future than right here. The lake house looked exactly as I remembered it. Weathered wood silvered by decades of sun and rain. Wild roses climbing the porch rails, that old wooden dock stretching out into the water like a finger pointing to something just out of reach. Mr. Harrison, Grandpa's lawyer, was waiting for us on the porch. He was a small man with wire-rimmed glasses and a serious expression that gave nothing away. We gathered in the cabin's main room, Mom and Dad, James and his wife Patricia, Catherine and her husband David, and me. The reading started predictably enough. The bulk of Mitchell Properties went to James, with Catherine receiving a significant share. Mom and Dad got the family home in the city and several valuable investment properties. Various smaller assets were distributed among extended family members. Then Mr. Harrison cleared his throat. And now for the lake house property. James sat up straighter, a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. Catherine leaned forward, her designer bracelet catching the light from the window. The lake house and all associated property, Mr. Harrison read, including the surrounding 50 acres and all contents therein, I leave to my granddaughter, Grace Mitchell. The silence that followed was absolute. Even the lake seemed to hold its breath. There must be some mistake, James said finally, his voice tight. Grace doesn't know anything about property development. She's a librarian. Mr. Harrison adjusted his glasses. There's no mistake. Mr. Mitchell was very specific about this bequest. He also left something else for Grace. He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a familiar green metal box. His personal tackle box, which he requested be given to her immediately. Catherine couldn't contain her laugh. Oh, that's perfect. James and I get multi-million-dollar property portfolios, and Grace gets a rusty old box of fishing lures. Seems about right. I took the tackle box, my hands shaking slightly. It was heavier than I remembered. The lake house property comes with certain conditions, Mr. Harrison continued. It cannot be sold or developed for commercial purposes for a period of 50 years from the date of Theodore Mitchell's death. It must remain a single-family residence in its current form. James exploded out of his chair. That's ridiculous. This is prime development land. The potential value is irrelevant, Mr. Harrison cut in smoothly. These conditions are legally binding. Any attempt to circumvent them will result in the property reverting to a conservation trust. The meeting devolved into chaos after that. James demanded to see documentation. Catherine called her lawyer. Mom burst into tears about the family legacy being wasted. Through it all, I sat quietly, the tackle box heavy in my lap. Later that night, alone in my apartment, I opened the box for the first time since Grandpa's death. The familiar array of lures and lines was there, but something else caught my eye. A false bottom, slightly askew. My hands trembled as I pried it up. Underneath lay a stack of documents, yellowed with age, and an envelope with my name written in Grandpa's familiar scrawl. My dearest Gracie, the letter began. If you're reading this, then you've already received some surprising news. But what you don't know yet is that the lake house isn't just a piece of property. It's the key to a secret I've kept for over 50 years. My hands shook as I continued reading Grandpa's letter, the paper crinkling softly in the quiet of my apartment. The lake house has been more than just a home. It's been a guardian of secrets. Back in 1972, when I was just starting out, I discovered something that changed everything. Those mysterious lights I told you about, the ones across the lake, they weren't lights at all. They were reflections from something far more valuable. I spread out the documents that had been hidden with the letter. Geological surveys, mineral rights agreements, and most importantly, a series of underwater survey maps of the lake. Certain areas were marked with Grandpa's neat handwriting. Primary deposit location and secondary vein confirmed. The lake bed contains one of the largest gold deposits in the state, the letter continued. I found it by accident while fishing, noticed unusual rocks that had washed up after a storm. Had them tested quietly. But I knew if word got out, everything would change. The lake would be drained, the land destroyed by mining operations. So I did the only thing I could think of. I started buying up all the property around the deposit. My heart pounded as I read on. The tackle box held more than just documents. There was a small velvet pouch containing rough gold nuggets, clearly pulled from the lake bed. Mitchell Properties began as a way to protect the lake, Grandpa explained. Every luxury home built, every development planned, was carefully designed to make the area so valuable for residential use that mining would never be considered. The other properties I've left to your siblings are valuable, yes. But the real treasure has always been right here, under the water. The next morning, I drove back to the lake house early, arriving just as dawn was breaking over the water. The place looked different now, knowing what lay beneath those calm waters. I walked out onto the dock, remembering all those fishing trips with Grandpa. He hadn't just been fishing. He'd been checking on his secret, maintaining his vigil over the lake. A car door slammed behind me. James and Catherine had arrived, along with their lawyers. "Grace," James called out, his voice carrying that patronizing tone he perfected over years of being the successful sibling. "We need to talk about this situation." I turned slowly, Grandpa's letter secure in my pocket. What situation would that be? This ridiculous will restriction. Catherine cut in, tapping her designer boot impatiently. "We've had our lawyers look it over. There might be a way to contest it, prove Grandpa wasn't in his right mind." "He was perfectly sane," I said quietly. "He knew exactly what he was doing." "Did he?" James stepped closer, trying to loom over me. "Did he really think a librarian could manage a property like this? You don't know the first thing about real estate value." "No," I agreed, "but I know about other kinds of value, like the value of keeping secrets." Something in my tone made him pause. Catherine's eyes narrowed. "What are you talking about?" I pulled out the geological surveys, watched their faces as they realized what they were looking at. The color drained from James's face as he read the estimated value of the gold deposits. This can't be real," he stammered. "Oh, it's real," I said. Grandpa had it all verified. Multiple surveys over the years, all kept quiet. The gold is there, but it can never be mined. That's what the development restrictions are really about. As long as this stays high-value residential property, no one will ever drain the lake for mining. But But that's millions, billions. Catherine's voice was barely a whisper. And it's going to stay right where it is, I said firmly, just like Grandpa wanted. The lake will remain undisturbed, the environment protected, the community preserved. We could find a way, James started, his eyes gleaming with that same greed I'd seen at the will reading. Controlled extraction, minimal impact. No, I cut him off. And before you get any ideas, you should know that I've already had copies of all these documents filed with multiple environmental agencies and conservation trusts. If anyone tries to develop this property or disturb the lake, everything becomes public. The area would be immediately declared a protected site. You do that? Catherine asked. Give up all that money? It's not about the money, I said, echoing Grandpa's words. It never was. It's about protecting something precious. Grandpa understood that. It's why he left the lake house to me, because he knew I'd understand too. The next few months were a storm of legal threats and family drama. James and Catherine tried everything to break the will's restrictions. But Grandpa's lawyers had done their work well. The conditions were ironclad. Mom stopped speaking to me entirely. Dad tried to play peacemaker, but eventually gave up. Family dinners became a thing of the past. But surprisingly, I was okay with that. I moved into the lake house, finding peace in its simple rooms and quiet surroundings. The library agreed to let me work partially from home, running virtual reading programs and managing digital collections. On clear days, I set up my laptop on the porch, working to the sound of waves lapping against the shore. Sometimes, when the light hits the water just right, I can see what Grandpa saw, not just the golden gleam of mineral deposits, but the true value of preserving something beautiful and wild in an increasingly developed world. Last week, a developer offered me $50 million for the property, no questions asked. I sent back a simple response: not for sale, at any price. The funny thing about inheritance is that it's not always what you expect. James and Catherine got their millions in real estate holdings, but I got something far more valuable: a purpose, a legacy, a sacred trust. Yesterday, I found an old photo album in the lake house attic. In it was a picture of Grandpa as a young man, standing on this same dock, holding that green tackle box. He was smiling at the camera with the same kind of contentment I feel now, knowing he was protecting something precious. I've started my own secret project inspired by Grandpa's careful documentation. I'm writing a history of the lake, recording its stories, its mysteries, its importance to the community. Someday when the time is right, this too will be revealed, not for profit or gain, but to help others understand why some things are worth more than gold. James still tries occasionally to convince me to be reasonable about the property. Catherine sends passive-aggressive messages about family duty and wasted opportunities. But their words don't touch me anymore. I have my books, my lake, my purpose. And on quiet mornings, when mist rises from the water and the sun paints everything in shades of gold, I can almost hear Grandpa's voice. Some riches can't be counted, Gracie. Some treasures are meant to stay hidden. The lake keeps its secrets, and so do I. But there's one truth that isn't hidden anymore. Sometimes the greatest inheritance isn't what you can spend, but what you choose to protect. Last summer, I started a children's reading program on the dock. Local kids come every Saturday morning, sitting cross-legged on the weathered wood, listening to stories while fish jump in the golden water behind us. In their wide-eyed wonder at tales of mystery and magic, I see the real treasure Grandpa was protecting, not the gold beneath the water, but the joy and wonder above it. Sometimes one of them will ask about the old green tackle box that sits nearby during our reading sessions. I just smile and tell them what Grandpa always told me. Some things are worth more than money. They don't know about the gold under their feet, about the billions in mineral wealth they're sitting above. They just know this is a special place, a place where stories come alive and imagination runs free. And in the end, isn't that worth more than all the gold in the world? The lake shimmers in the sunlight, keeping its secrets safe beneath its surface. And I, my grandfather's true heir in more ways than one, keep watch over it all, protecting not just a piece of property, but a piece of magic in an increasingly ordinary world. After all, as Grandpa wrote in his final words to me, the real treasure, Gracie, isn't what you take from the world. It's what you protect for future generations. And so I sit on my grandfather's dock, surrounded by children's books and fishing gear, watching the sun sparkle on water that hides a fortune. But the real fortune isn't the gold below. It's the legacy of protection, the power of secrets kept for the right reasons, and the knowledge that sometimes the most valuable inheritance is the wisdom to know what's truly precious.